The Zeta-9 space station hung in the void like an old, cantankerous mechanic who insisted they were still perfectly capable of doing their job. Thank you very much. It wasn't pretty, all mismatched panels and exposed conduits, but it had a certain charm if you squinted and tilted your head just right. Kind of like how Elias Rohr was currently tilting his head at his reflection in the transport bay window, grimacing at the uneven haircut the station's maintenance robot had given him yesterday. At least I'm on brand, he muttered, smoothing down a particularly rebellious tuft. Mediocre linguist, mediocre haircut. His shoes squeaked embarrassingly as he made his way down the central corridor. The sound echoed off the metal walls, announcing his arrival to anyone within earshot. Not exactly the professional entrance he'd hoped for when accepting this assignment as translator between the Galactic Council and the mysterious Carolith species. Just don't screw this one up, Rohr, he told himself. Remember the Centaurian diplomatic crisis. He winced at the memory. Who knew that mispronouncing one vowel would convert "we extend the hand of friendship" into "we demand your most succulent larvae"? The briefing he'd received mentioned that the Carolith delegation had arrived days ago, but hadn't eaten, slept, or communicated beyond sending signals that made the translation devices have nervous breakdowns, the technical term used by his supervisor. Great. Just great. As the doors to the diplomatic chamber hissed open, Elias was immediately struck by the unnatural stillness of the room. It wasn't merely quiet. It was a void of sound that seemed to swallow even the whisper of his breathing. The temperature dropped several degrees compared to the corridor, creating an almost tangible barrier between worlds. And there she was. The Carolith representative stood by the far viewport, her silhouette outlined against the backdrop of stars. She appeared humanoid, but with skin that seemed to capture and refract light like the surface of a soap bubble. Her hair, if that's what it was, floated around her head in silver tendrils that mimicked the movement of stars. Long, elegantly pointed ears extended from the sides of her head, twitching subtly as he entered. But what captivated Elias most were her gloves. They rippled like liquid glass, constantly shifting and changing as if they contained miniature galaxies. Hi there, I'm Elias Rohr, your new translator. Though I'm more of a linguistic disaster waiting to happen, he said with a nervous laugh. Sorry about the squeaky shoes. Budget cuts meant I had to choose between decent footwear and breakfast this month. The Carolith woman turned slowly, her head tilting at a precise angle that somehow managed to convey both curiosity and mild disdain. For a moment, her face remained perfectly still. Then the corner of her mouth twitched almost imperceptibly. I am Cyril, she said, her voice surprisingly melodic, yet carrying harmonic undertones that human vocal cords could never produce. You are? Unexpected. I get that a lot, Elias replied, stepping forward, usually followed by disappointingly so. Cyril's eyes, iridescent and without pupils, studied him intently. You will attempt to bridge our communication? That's the plan. Though attempt is the operative word here. Our language is not merely sounds and symbols, Cyril explained, gesturing to a holographic display of complex, interlocking glyphs floating between them. It is living, built on emotional resonance and ancestral memory. Elias approached the display, recognizing that these weren't simple linguistic patterns, but something far more intricate. So, I'm not just translating words. I'm trying to connect with the essence of Carolith communication. Precisely, which is why I question your suitability. She stepped closer, her movements fluid like water. Your species has notoriously loud emotions, yet questionable control over them. Elias felt a sting of defensiveness. We might be emotionally loud, but that doesn't mean we can't understand nuance. Something flashed across the control panel, strange Carolith characters that seemed to vibrate and blur. Cyril moved with startling speed, shutting down the display with a swift motion of her gloved hand. Is everything okay? Elias asked. A minor anomaly, she replied too quickly. We will begin our work tomorrow. As Elias left the chamber, curiosity nagged at him. What was hiding behind those enigmatic symbols, and why did Cyril seem so alarmed by them? Every morning thereafter, Elias brought a cup of what the station's synthesizer insisted was coffee, though its murky brown color and vaguely metallic aftertaste suggested otherwise, to their sessions in the sound-isolated diplomatic chamber. The Kerolith symbols hovered in three-dimensional clusters, rotating and shifting in response to their interactions. So this glyph represents sadness mixed with acceptance, Elias guessed, pointing to a particularly complex formation. Not quite, Cyril replied. It is closer to the feeling of watching the last light of a familiar star as one travels beyond its reach, knowing return is unlikely. Ah, so space melancholy. Got it. Cyril's head tilted again, which Elias had begun to recognize as her equivalent of a raised eyebrow. Your simplification is amusing. I aim to please, he said with a mock bow, though usually I just end up confusing everyone. Elias noticed how Cyril's gloves shimmered whenever she manipulated the holographic interface. Can I ask about the gloves? They're beautiful, but is there a reason Kerolith don't make direct contact? A stillness came over Cyril, her ears flattening slightly against her head. Touch, for my people, is sacred. It transfers emotions, memories, sometimes dissolves the boundaries between individuals. These gloves serve as barriers. Interesting. Humans are pretty tactile, actually. We shake hands, pat shoulders, hug. You willingly embrace others? Cyril's eyes widened, a mix of shock and fascination crossing her features. Without protection, all the time. It's how we show affection, comfort, congratulations. Fascinating and somewhat alarming. As the days passed, Elias began to grasp the emotional architecture of Kerolith language. Each symbol contained layers of meaning, visual representation, ancestral recollection, sensory experience, all woven together in a complex tapestry. Their sessions took on a comfortable rhythm. Elias would occasionally make terrible jokes that Cyril would respond to with that now familiar ear twitch or, on rare occasions, a barely perceptible smile. Here, let me show you something from Earth culture, Elias said one day, standing up. This is what we call disco. It was very popular about 3 centuries ago. He proceeded to demonstrate the most exaggerated disco moves he could remember, complete with finger pointing and hip swivels. Cyril watched him with the same intense focus one might give to a particularly baffling religious ceremony. Is this communication? She asked when he finally stopped. Only of one's complete disregard for dignity, Elias replied, slightly winded. Later that week, during a particularly challenging translation session, Cyril made an unexpected comment. You dream loudly. Elias paused, stylus hovering over his notes. What? Through the station walls. I hear your dreams. They are vibrant. Elias felt heat rise to his face. You can hear my dreams? What exactly do you hear? Sadness, for child. Your sister's daughter. The stylus clattered to the table. My niece, yes. She died when she was 7. But how could you possibly? And there was also something about running from an automated food dispenser that was chasing you with expired nutrient paste. Despite himself, Elias laughed. Yeah, that one's recurring. Stems from a childhood trauma at the Mars Colony food court. Our species should not be able to perceive human dreams, Cyril said, her voice tinged with something like wonder. Yet I hear yours clearly. There is a resonance between us that is unexpected. Before Elias could process this revelation, an alert chime from Cyril's console. On the display, something was moving near the outer perimeter of the station's sensor range. A strange fluctuation in space-time. What is that? Elias asked. Cyril hesitated, then shut down the display. We are searching for something ancient. Ancient as in old artifacts, or ancient as in potentially dangerous cosmic entity that could swallow us whole? Both, perhaps. A shadow passed across her features. We should continue our work. Elias felt a vague sense of danger, yet couldn't help being intrigued by whatever mystery the Kerolith were hiding. The next day, Elias arrived at the diplomatic chamber to find it transformed. Floating around Cyril were dozens of glowing spheres, ranging from the size of marbles to basketballs, each pulsing with internal light and strange patterns. Mnemonic nodes, Searle explained before he could ask. Repositories of our collective memory, used for generations to store emotions, history, cultural knowledge. Elias approached cautiously. They're beautiful. And failing, Searle said, her voice uncharacteristically emotional. They no longer respond to Keralith touch. Our history, our collective consciousness, is becoming inaccessible. Why show me this now? Because they reacted when you entered. Searle gestured to the spheres, which had indeed begun to pulse more intensely in his presence. Would you try to touch one? Elias hesitated. Are you sure? Please. Slowly, he reached out toward a medium-sized sphere hovering at chest height. As his fingers made contact, the node flared with blinding light. Suddenly, the room was filled with projections of his own. Memories, playing with his niece in a summer field, the crushing grief at her funeral, the awkward triumph of his first successful translation job, even lines from the embarrassingly bad poetry he'd written as a teenager. He yanked his hand back, but the display continued for several seconds before fading. Searle stood motionless, her eyes wide. This should not be possible. No Keralith can activate the nodes this way anymore. What happened to your people? Elias asked softly. Searle's shoulders slumped slightly. We chose efficiency over connection. Centuries ago, my ancestors decided that touch, with its overwhelming transfer of emotion, was inefficient, chaotic. They began using interfaces, then barriers, then gloves. Eventually, we lost something essential, the raw emotional connectivity that powered our mnemonic technology. And now the nodes are rejecting you. Yes, they respond to you because you carry what we have suppressed, unfiltered emotional resonance. So, your mission here is to find a way to restore our connection to the nodes, yes. But there is more. Searle moved to the console, bringing up the strange readings from the outer sensors. This is what we call a thought form, an ancient entity that once synchronized with Keralith emotions, amplifying and harmonizing them across space. Let me guess, it's waking up? Yes, but without proper emotional guidance. It may amplify fear instead of harmony. The consequences could be catastrophic for my people. Elias studied the readings, then looked at the mnemonic nodes still hovering around them. What if we use these, combined with whatever empathic link seems to exist between us? It will be dangerous, Searle warned. Intimate beyond anything you can imagine. I've survived the Mars colony food court, Elias said with a grin that masked his nervousness. I think I can handle this. They arranged the mnemonic nodes in a circle, activating the Keralith linguistic interface to establish a connection with the distant thought form. In the center of the room, Elias and Searle stood facing each other. Once we begin, Searle said, her voice barely above a whisper, there is no turning back. You will experience all my memories and I yours. We may never fully separate again. Slowly, she began removing her gloves. For the first time, Elias saw her hands, pearlescent skin with intricate patterns that shifted like constellations beneath the surface. You're sure about this? He asked. No, she admitted, but I'm certain we must try. As Searle's bare hand extended toward his, Elias felt his heart pounding. Their fingertips touched first, a cascade of tiny electric shocks racing up his arm. Then their palms met, and the world exploded. Images, sounds, feelings, a torrent of memories not his own flooded through him. Alien landscapes under triple suns, the harmonious chorus of Keralith communal singing, the profound loneliness of a culture slowly losing its emotional core. Simultaneously, he felt his own memories pouring out, childhood victories and humiliations, loves found and lost, the bittersweet taste of his grandmother's apple pie, the crushing weight of failure, the soaring joy of connection. Around them, the mnemonic nodes blazed with light, forming networks of luminous threads that wove between them like a cosmic web. The threads extended outward, beyond the station, reaching toward the distant thought form. The response came like a thunderclap. The entire station shuddered as a wave of resonance washed over them. Searle cried out, her knees buckling under the emotional onslaught. Too much, she gasped, her hand still clasped tightly in his. The accumulated grief of generations. Focus on the good, Elias urged, supporting her with his free arm. Remember the laughter, the wonder. Together, they pushed back against the tide of sorrow, projecting memories of joy, of discovery, of connection. Gradually, the pain began to transmute into something else, a bittersweet harmony of all emotions, balanced and whole. The thought form's chaotic energy smoothed into rhythmic pulses. Throughout the station, a deep, resonant tone began to sound, like the humming of an immense crystal bowl. When the light finally dimmed, Elias and Cyril collapsed to the floor, still hand in hand. Around them, the mnemonic nodes drifted in gentle orbits, glowing with steady, harmonious light. The station sensors showed the thought form stabilizing, its pattern shifting from jagged peaks to flowing waves. "Did we do it?" Elias asked weakly. Cyril's eyes, when they opened, seemed more vibrant than before. "Yes," she whispered. "We have begun a healing." The next morning, Zeta 9 station felt different, as if the very air had become more alive, vibrating with subtle harmonics. Elias woke with a mild headache, but an inexplicable sense of elation. He found Cyril in the diplomatic chamber, her hands ungloved, manipulating the now brilliantly glowing mnemonic. Nodes with graceful movements. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Changed," she replied simply. "Your emotions still echo within me. It is not unpleasant." Before they could say more, the chamber doors opened to admit a delegation of Galactic Council representatives, accompanied by more Carolith. The newcomers stopped short, staring at the glowing network of nodes and at Cyril's bare hands. "What have you done?" asked an older Carolith, his voice resonating with alarm. Together, Elias and Cyril explained their discovery, how human emotional resonance had reactivated the mnemonic technology, how they had established contact with the thought form and begun to harmonize its energies. "We don't need to remain isolated," Cyril said, addressing her fellow Carolith. "We don't need to fear our emotions or the intimacy of connection. This is dangerous," the elder Carolith warned. "Centuries of cultural evolution led us to stagnation," Cyril finished. "Look at the nodes. They respond again. And the thought form no longer threatens us. It sings with us." As if to emphasize her point, the station hummed with that same crystalline resonance they had heard before. The mnemonic nodes pulsed in harmony, casting patterns of light across the faces of all present. The Galactic Council representatives watched in fascination as the skeptical Carolith cautiously approached the nodes, extending hesitant hands toward them. When the spheres responded with gentle illumination, their expressions shifted from doubt to wonder. "Through Elias, we have seen the power of human emotion," Cyril continued. "Yes, it is chaotic and intense, but it also offers a connection we had forgotten." In the days that followed, more Carolith arrived at the station to witness the phenomenon. Some remained reluctant, but others began removing their gloves, tentatively exploring the renewed sensitivity to the mnemonic technology. The Galactic Council, recognizing the historic nature of the breakthrough, proposed establishing a permanent joint research facility where humans and Carolith could continue exploring their unexpected synergy. On the eve of Elias's scheduled departure for the new facility, he and Cyril stood at the same viewport where they had first met. "It's strange," he said, watching distant stars. "A month ago, I was just hoping not to cause an interstellar incident. Now I've got parts of an alien civilization living in my head. And I have your terrible Mars food court nightmares," Cyril replied with what was now unmistakably a smile. "Fair trade, I think." Their hands found each other without looking, fingers intertwining naturally. The contact no longer brought the overwhelming flood of memories. They had learned to modulate the connection, to share without drowning in each other's consciousness. "You're the first human I ever touched," Cyril said softly. "I never imagined where it would lead. To boldly go where no linguist has gone before," Elias suggested with a grin. Cyril's free hand lightly swatted his arm, a very human gesture she had adopted. Your humor remains incomprehensible, yet you laugh anyway. Perhaps that is the most important lesson. Some things transcend understanding. A gentle alert chimed from Cyril's console, a message from the thought form, now established in stable orbit around a distant star. Its pattern suggested it had discovered something else, another ancient consciousness, perhaps, waiting to be awakened. Elias smiled. Cyril tilted her head in that familiar way. Both turned toward the stars, ready for whatever came next, together. The universe, it seemed, had much more to say. And now, at last, they were ready to listen.